This is Tara Graham reporting for the Real News Network in Worcester County, Maryland. I'm standing outside the Worcester County Courthouse where the jury has just delivered a verdict in the case of Kelvin Sewell, Pocomoke City's first black police chief who is charged with corruption and misconduct in office. I'm here with Stephen Janis to tell me about what happened in the courtroom today. Stephen, what just happened inside?
Well, the jury returned a verdict of guilty on the charge of corruption, misconduct in office, or interfering with an investigation, and not guilty with regards to a conspiracy between himself and Lieutenant Green. So basically, the jury said that Kelvin Sewell interfered with an accident investigation that involved a Pocomoke resident, Doug Matthews. So they basically came to the conclusion, based upon the evidence, that he indeed did interfere in an accident, that the person who was involved in this action should have been charged with something, I guess, or somehow benefited from Chief Sewell's intervention. Maybe that he should have gotten a citation or something specific. So they have just returned a guilty verdict on one of two counts.
When we were in the courtroom, we heard the closing arguments, and we saw that the prosecution took a great deal of time to point out the difference in the officers' testimonies.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that was key in the jury's decision?
Well, there was a conflict because I would say the key to this case was the testimony of two of Sewell's subordinates. Both officers were at the accident, one who had started the investigation, one who later assumed the investigation. And Chief Sewell testified himself on his own behalf and said both officers kind of implied that Chief Sewell directed the investigation to a junior officer who was on probation, who of course wouldn't, I guess would be more susceptible to his influence. And that they also implied that he had told him, hey, this is just an accident, don't ask him questions about whether he's drunk or not, this is just an accident. So I think both officers, their testimony was probably the linchpin of this case. And Chief Sewell said, that he flat out said they lied. And yes, you're right, the prosecution did ask specifically. So the jurors must have believed the two officers over the chief in terms of what was said and what was done.
Now, Chief Sewell described, and as well as his attorneys described, something called post-integrity, which is the reason he explained as to why he directed Officer Barnes to handle the case of the car accident. Can you tell us a little bit about post-integrity?
Well, post-integrity is basically that the officer whose post it is will assume any investigation or any sort of thing that happens in their sector. So Pocomoke City is divided into two sectors, north and south, and the one officer, the junior officer who was on probation, who the prosecutor said would be more susceptible to influence, was in the south where this accident occurred. So Chief Sewell explained that he assigned this officer the case because it was her sector. The prosecution alleged that he gave it to her for other reasons other than that. So one of the things that's interesting today is, the origin of this case. One of the big pictures, I think, big elephant in the room was the fact that Sewell has alleged discrimination, that the EEOC has found that he was discriminated against, and he was fired 2 years ago. So that was sort of a big part of this case. It wasn't really brought into the courtroom. But it's interesting today because we asked Emmett Davitt, who is a prosecutor, about how this case originated, when it originated. It's interesting what he said. Let's listen to what he had to say. You're going to tell us about when the investigation was initiated during the trial?
Yeah, sure. And I can certainly direct you now. It's a matter of public record. There's all kinds of motions where the whole investigation is laid out if you go to the court files. So I'm not trying to blow off your question, but basically it was initiated when Chief Kelvin Sewell called our office making complaints about others. Things didn't seem to add up. He then left the department. The new interim chief came. There was a series of complaints. We were called repeatedly asking us to get involved in the investigation. We came down and became involved.
Oh, and was that Bo Oglesby who asked you, or was it anybody?
No, that was the interim police chief that took over.
Oh, he asked you?
He asked us to repeatedly.
That's Chief Wilharden?
No, that was the interim chief before that.
The state police chief.
Interim chief Starner. Yeah. And then our entire investigation was to come down and talk to all the police officers. Talk to all the and we talked to every police officer we could talk to down there and came to the determinations we did.
Hey, do you believe justice was served, Counselor?
I do, absolutely. Okay. All
right,
thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
What do you think of what Prosecutor Emmett Davitt had to say?
Well, it's interesting because I think one of the questions many people have asked about this case is it retaliatory? Because it happened after the lawsuit. But Emmett Davitt claims that it started when the new chief was installed, who is a
With
member.
the interim chief,
Interim chief.
Sterner, correct?
Stern, yeah, he was a chief who was part of the state police. Who it's interesting because the discrimination complaints that Sewell filed, or Sewell, not Sewell, but Sewell's subordinate, which started all this, Frank Savage, filed was against members of the of Worcester County Task Force, who includes state police. So it's very interesting that this case originated with someone who was part of the state police. But that I think. At this point, the jury has spoken, so it'll be interesting to see what happens. There's a lot of things that happen in the preliminary parts of this case that I think are going to be an issue later on. I would imagine if there's any appeal, like the fact that Sewell is not allowed to have an expert witness, for example. He wasn't allowed to bring up the disciplinary records of the officers who testified against him, which of course is relevant. But right now it's a jury verdict, and I think one thing that you talked about quite a bit when we were in the courtroom was this is going to end his career. I mean, this is a man who has served for 30 years. Now, I wrote a book with Kelvin Sewell, so I have to be full disclosure about that I have some relationship with him. But he's served Baltimore City as a homicide detective. He served Baltimore City as a narcotics detective.
Worked in the DEA.
And I mean, you can give me your impression, but when you talk to people about him in Pocomoke, what was your impression about the job he did in Pocomoke?
Well, when I spoke to people in Pocomoke City, they told me one of the things that they loved about their police chief, and many of the people I spoke to loved their police chief, they mentioned that he was available to them at all hours, that they could call him on his cell phone and they could have the chief of police answer and to actually come to their house and talk to him about what was going on, what they needed him for. So the fact that they could call the chief of police on their cell phone, I think was unique and something that he could do for Pocomoke that they really appreciated. And also that he took time to actually interact with the community. One of the things I was told was about a Halloween celebration where he would have the kids come to the police station, get candy. They would drive with their police cars with the sirens on and hand out candy to the kids. And that he also had a day where he would bring kids into the police station, take one of the kids, put the chief of police hat on him and say, hey, you guys, this could be the chief of police. So there was a lot of interaction with the kids and with the families in Pocomoke City.
Which is why I think the community, after the verdict, well, at least Reverend James Jones, who has been a supporter of Chief Sewell, still continues to support him. Let's listen to what he had to say.
I believe that someone felt that they just had to make a statement, so they found one in favor and the other not. Here's a person that has given over 30 years of honorable service to the state of Maryland in both the Western Shore and here, and to be judged because they made a call that they were allowed to make, I just feel that it was unjust. And then two, we're not going to throw race at the people, but to look at a jury and it not be a jury of his peers, 12 jurists and one African-American juror. I felt that was a disadvantage, but because of the representation that he received, I still felt good about what the outcome would be.
Well, you saw the evidence. Do you think the evidence added up to corruption?
No, not by any means. Not by any means.
One of the things that was brought up was that Chief Sewell could have an appeal, but one of the things that he would have to appeal on is whether or not the jury represented his peers. Now, the jury composition was majority white. There was only one African-American juror. Do you think that will have any effect on the appeals process?
Well, that gets in the issue that I think is defined this case from the beginning, which is race. I mean, people in places like Worcester County in the United States see race differently. I would think, listen to what Reverend Jones said to us, that there were no African Americans on the jury except for one, and he believes that had an effect. Kelvin alleged discrimination, and the EOC said he was discriminating, and the Justice Department has said it. But people in Worcester County obviously don't feel the same way, or at least a lot of people in Pocomoke do not feel that he suffered discrimination. So that could be a key contention, especially given the context of the racial background of this. If you didn't have the EOC ruling that he was discriminated against, if you didn't have the federal government, if you didn't have the allegations of discrimination, then I think maybe. But with that, what has occurred in Worcester County and how this case came about, I think yes, I think that would be a consideration, both the jury and the process itself.
Now, one thing that we both covered the Freddie Gray trial in Baltimore City, where 6 police police officers were on trial for the death of Freddie Gray. Now, do you see any sort of parallels between those police officers being on trial and these police officers being on trial?
Well, to me, it's sort of a contrast. You know, to me, to have all these resources, and it's kind of interesting or difficult to understand, you know, why an accident where two parked cars were hit
Simple property damage.
would suddenly come into the purview of the state prosecutor of the state of Maryland. You know, with the Freddie Gray case, there was a man who died, a city that convulsed. You know, horrible consequences.
Right.
Here, it's really difficult because, as was pointed out during the trial, the cars were repaired. An accident report was filed. Insurance covered the accident.
Right.
So it is something that, I guess, for us in places like Baltimore, it's always difficult to understand what a crime means or what a crime is, or why people pursue something and why they don't pursue something, because it's just so hard to understand why an accident that occurred 2 years ago would suddenly become an issue in 2016.
This is Taya Graham and Stephen Janis reporting for the Real News Network in Worcester County, Maryland.